And this is, of course, our special show, Trump's White House Return, where we focus on Donald Trump's camp and the strategies which lie ahead for him just days ahead of the inauguration, the big inauguration on Jan 20th, when Donald Trump is going to take oath as the US president once again. Now, today, of course, was all about the sentencing in the hush money case. And Donald Trump, the US president-elect, has become the first felon who will enter the White House after a US court upheld his conviction in the hush money case. Donald Trump has been sentenced to an unconditional discharge for covering up unaccounted payments to a porn star. This means that the president-elect has been found guilty of his charges but will not face any jail time or penalty because he's been elected president of the United States and will take oath to the country's highest office, as I mentioned, in a few days from now on January 20th. Donald Trump did not even attend the session court in person, choosing to do so virtually, knowing well that he would not be sent to jail. For more details on what happened inside court, I'm joined by my colleague Natasha Israni, who is reporting from New York. Natasha, if you can just take our viewers through some of the highlights from the court hearing today.
Yes, well, the hearing was fairly short, which is usual for less than 40 minutes. And as you mentioned, Donald Trump was not expected to appear in person, and he didn't. He appeared virtually from Florida alongside his lawyer, and there were two American flags behind him. And, you know, very, very symbolic, because this is what he was hoping to avoid. He was hoping to avoid being sentenced and being a convicted felon on record before taking inauguration and taking oath as the next president of the United States. But that didn't go in his favor. He was sentenced by the judge, and there is no penalty. There are no fines. We already knew that. But the sentencing itself remains very symbolic, something that he had tried to avoid by multiple appeals at different levels, including a last-minute appeal that his lawyers had made to the Supreme Court just earlier this week, asking them to delay the sentencing further. Now, Donald Trump, who came out, he again said that this was a political witch hunt. He criticized the whole proceeding as a despicable charade, is what he called it, quote unquote. The judge also spoke. The judge said that he didn't like that Donald Trump had repeatedly, what he said was repeatedly insulted the judiciary. So the judge has maintained before that he's not happy with the way Donald Trump had behaved through the entire legal proceedings, not just today, but also what started last year and concluded in May when he was convicted of 34 counts. And finally, the sentencing coming today. But Donald Trump has already said that he will appeal. He will appeal. And that appeal, again, could take years to wind its way through local and state courts here in New York.
Right, Natasha, there. Thank you so much for joining us and also, of course, talking about some of the key points which came through from the court today. And to discuss this further, I'm also joined on the broadcast by four guests. Cheryl Bader, law professor from Fordham University. She's joining us live from New York. Raymond Vickery, former Assistant Secretary of Commerce in the US, joining us from Washington, D.C. Jonah Blank, former advisor to Joe Biden, joining from Washington, D.C. as well. And also we have Alex Zidane, Republican strategist, joining from New Jersey. I welcome all of you to the show. But first, coming to you, Cheryl Bader, if you can explain for our viewers outside of the US on how the system works, actually, the technicality of this, that Donald Trump was sentenced and was in fact convicted and sentenced in this case of felony. He's been convicted but won't serve a jail term or even have to pay up a penalty. If you can just break it down for our viewers.
So the jury in our system, we have a jury trial, and a jury of 12 people determined that he was guilty of 34 counts of falsifying business records. And so the sentence comes next, but the Trump lawyers were able to postpone the sentencing because the Supreme Court had issued a ruling in the interim giving presidential immunity under certain instances, and the Trump team asked the judge to consider what impact that has on the case and certain evidence that came into the case. And the judge determined that it was not applicable. But as it was getting closer to the election, the Trump team also argued that any sentencing might impact and interfere with the election. And Judge Merchan wanted to have a careful balance between honoring the jury's verdict, but also not interfering with the election. And so after that, then Trump is now again tried, fighting tooth and nail to delay this. Argued that he can't be sentenced now because it's so close to his inauguration. But Judge Merchan rejected that argument and said immunity doesn't apply. There really is no reason to delay this sentence. And now that the sentence actually occurred in the U.S., in New York, judgment is actually entered. And so Trump is declared officially a felon. And that's what he was trying so hard to avoid.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mr. Alex Zidane, if I can come to you, this is not the kind of label that anyone would want walking into the White House. We are just days to go from the inauguration ceremony. How does this weigh on Donald Trump?
In 10 days, President Trump will have the most important title that anyone in our country can be honored to have, President of the United States. That's the title that will matter the most in just 10 short days. The title of president-elect matters far more right now. Look, this was a paperwork case. This was a misdemeanor that an ambitious New York district attorney stretched to make into a felony case. President Trump will appeal, and he should appeal, because I think he's got a case here. Regardless, I would rather my president be a convicted felon, if given the choice, than a dementia patient like we've seen out of Joe Biden for the last 4 years.
Let me go across to Mr. Jonah Blank. You heard what Mr. Alex Zidane had to say. You can respond to that. But also, we've seen that Donald Trump stuck to his guns even today, claiming that there was no case to begin with. Despite being sentenced, despite being convicted, he seems unflustered.
Well, of course, he always is. He lies as often as he breathes. And the fact that he is a convicted felon does not really change anything for him. Let's be clear, there was absolutely no legal basis whatsoever for Judge Merchan to give Trump a get out of jail free on everything. He could have imposed a jail sentence or prison sentence months ago. He could have imposed a sentence to be delayed until after Trump was out of office. He could have imposed a fine. He could have even imposed parole. But again, we are seeing people across the board simply deferring to Trump and letting him literally get away with felonies.
I'll come back on that point to Cheryl Bader, but before that, let me bring in Mr. Raymond Vickery. Mr. Vickery, how do you think, because both sides in a way, everyone for that matter, seems to agree that Trump seems to shrug it off, at least as far as his supporters in US is concerned. He doesn't think that this is going to make any sort of an impact at all. He's going to enter the White House in a few days from now, but how do you see this as a case and which affects Trump's global image, if at all, according to you?
Well, thanks very much for having me. It seems to me the basic significance of this case is that at the Supreme Court level, post-election, this is the first time that our system has really held, even though it was a 5-4 decision. The Supreme Court, which has a majority that was enhanced by President Trump, has not sided with Trump and let the system, the rule of law, play out. I think that this is a very good development, and hopefully it augurs well for the future. That having been said, to your point, President Trump is a first-class demagogue. And he has the same song to sing no matter what, that he is the victim. And he shows an absolute disregard for the rule of law. I think the judge's sentence was very carefully tailored to not have the Supreme Court of the United States stop the proceedings. It is, in essence, as Jonah said, a bare minimum or letting him get away with some things, but not entirely. There are disabilities which go with being a felon in New York, particularly in terms of business licenses and how you would be able to conduct yourself and the privileges that you would have in New York. So that remains. But the basic message here is that we have withstood a test to the rule of law. And for people in a great democracy like India, as well as the United States and democracies throughout the world, this is extremely important because without the rule of law, without adherence to some standards and values, we have no society. We have no ability to go forward. So I think that that's a positive development.
Okay. Cheryl Bader, as I said, and you heard what Mr. Jonah Blank had to say, do you think that the judge had any other option? There could have been these other options that Mr. Blank was talking about. And also, there are several other cases still pending against Donald Trump. Are those also foregone conclusions now in a way?
So just to comment on the fact that this was charged as a felony, I think that was an appropriate use of the prosecutor's discretion, because in this case, the lies that Trump were telling had to do with keeping information from the American public that they might want to know before the election. And that's why it was elevated from a misdemeanor to a felony. And in terms of sentencing here, the judge ordered what's called an unconditional discharge. So there's no jail time, even though the felony counts itself carry the possibility of jail time. But the judge said to himself, what would be the point of incarcerating Donald Trump? What would be the point of putting conditions on him like community service, going out and cleaning the subways, right? There would be no point to that. Is a probation officer going to be able to monitor this man? No one else is able to, right? So it didn't seem like there was a practical point to any other sentencing. And so Judge Merchan was trying to balance the integrity of the jury process with the practicalities of this very unique situation. But of course, this is the only case where Trump seems to be being brought to justice. In the other cases, because of the fact that they're federal cases and the Supreme Court's ruling, and of course now Trump will be back in the White House and he will be in charge of the Justice Department. And so this is the one case where Trump was held accountable for his actions.
Right. Unfortunately, we have run out of time on this discussion. But Cheryl Bader, Raymond Vickery, Jonah Blank, and Alex Zidane, thank you all for joining me on.